I don't believe that there is a meaning to anything in that sense. Meaning in my life is very kind of constrained by my existence. My life is important because of to my wife. My life is important to my dog, my family, my people. That my life has value or has a reason based on the world that I've touched. Right, and so the idea that there needs to be a reason why the universe was created, the reason why I'm here, what my purpose doesn't resonate with me.
Welcome to the Men's Alliance podcast. Excited about our guest today. We've got Martin Johnson, and Martin is the author of the Atheist Survival Guide, 35 Ways to Combat Religious Intolerance. Martin, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Goose. Appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Martin and I talked a couple weeks ago, and, I just shared with him that we've been having too many people on the podcast who I agree with, and that can get kind of dull, can get a little bit boring. And it's like, man, I just want to have some conversations with people that I don't agree with. Let's have some good dialogue on some big, important topics that we can disagree on. I think that'll make for a great podcast. It'll make for a fun conversation for me, even if you guys don't like listening to it. I'm excited about it. So Martin and I had a call, and I got to say that I think this is going to be awesome because Martin agreed. He was like, yeah, nobody wants to just stay in an echo chamber and hear all their own ideas. So one of the things I'm hoping that today's podcast does, one of my goals for today, is kind of demonstrate, hopefully, how to have conversations with people that you don't agree with. And Martin and I both agreed that this is an important thing, an important skill for more people in this country. This has been an election year. We've seen people saying, boycott your family if they didn't vote like you. And so the nation is really torn, super divided, and that's never good. Families should not be divided, and neither should communities or countries. So I'm hoping, amongst other things today, we kind of model it's okay to disagree. That doesn't mean you can't have a conversation. So, Martin, let's dive right in. Tell us a little bit about your book, The Atheist Survival Guide, why it's important, why you wrote it, and why do atheists need a survival guide?
Sure. So you had mentioned kind of getting at having the willingness to be disagreeing. But I think, through this conversation, and hopefully we can also find some common ground, because I think there's a number of things that we probably agree on. Just as background, yes, I'm an atheist. Who I could call a sperm to worm atheist. I was born into a family that was not particularly religious. And I just, to date, I've never found an argument that would lead me to believe otherwise in terms of the existence of a God or deity or religion. I also, what you would call a coastal elite, in the sense that I work in Silicon Valley in high tech. I'm in cybersecurity. I've also taught history because I have my degree and background in that. Now, the interesting thing about this Atheist Survival Guide is that it's a little bit of a misnomer. It's not just for atheists. Particularly, it's really for anybody who's put it at a disadvantage in any society. Part of the reason why I wrote this book is that there's been kind of a global shift in the last 10 years, arguably more quickly in the last 5 years, towards movements and governments that are particularly autocratic or authoritarian, that are driven by cultural and religious chauvinism. And this is not just Christianity. right? You know, we look at India, you have the rise of Hindutva, which is a very biased Hindu nationalism that disadvantages Muslims. You have the perennial problem in the Middle East of Islam that can't separate out government from religion, and, you know, has become far more draconian in kind of its approach to the world, you know, the last 20 years since 9/11. So you have not just atheists, but Christians, Jews, anybody who disagrees ideologically with Islam, facing death in many cases, or facing, you know, extreme disadvantage. You can also look at Europe right now. You know, you have illiberal or zombie democracies in Hungary and Russia that are underpinned by their churches, and a lot of their politics, a lot of their legislation is highly disadvantageous to people that are not, you know, of the same belief system. And even Europe. You know, you look at Europe right now, and you have the rise of these fascist or semi-fascist organizations: Spain, Italy, France, with Marie Le Pen, Germany as well, that sort of pretend to be atheist, or not atheist, but religiously agnostic in a way, because, you know, a lot of Europeans like to say, "Hey, I'm not religious," but a lot of the policies that they push have its foundations in particularly restrictive versions of Christianity around, you know, sexual identity, around the roles of men and women, the treatment of, you know, Jews and Muslims. A lot of that is taking place in Europe as well. And obviously, you know, my main focus and, you know, my main area of knowledge is around what's going on in the U.S. With the rise of Christian nationalism, more authoritarian forms of government, and particularly that are backed by highly conservative versions of, you know, evangelical Christianity that are not necessarily shared by the majority of, in a lot of cases, of the American population. So, you know, the upshot is that, you know, again, the book is not, you know, it's the Atheist Survival Guide because I'm an atheist, but it's really, you know, projected to anybody who is facing, you know, abuse, persecution, in some countries, death, for what they believe in. And, you know, the survival component is kind of a, you know, there's a huge swath of, or a huge gradation of what you talk about persecution that you need to fight against. You know, obviously, if you live in Iran or Middle East, you have to worry about your life. But in other places like the U.S., for the most part, it just has to do with things like being disadvantaged in terms of education, where, you know, if there's legislation pushing things like prayer in school, or young earth creationism, or any of that kind of stuff, banning certain types of books that people are uncomfortable with. That's where it really comes in terms of survival. And I don't mean, again, existentially survival. I mean, really, you know, how do you navigate, you know, neighbors who may disagree with you religiously or politically? How do you shield yourself from abuse in, you know, the workspace if, you know, you're living in a place where, you know, the owners of the company are highly religious and, you know, are, you know, against even hiring somebody who's not of the same faith.
That's awesome. You just covered so much. I want to ask you, what do you mean by Christian nationalism? How would you define that?
Well, you know, a lot of people have different views of this, and basically, you know, the official, you know, definition, you know, a movement that believes that a country is founded for, run by Christians, and that anybody who's not Christian, who doesn't adhere to the same values, must basically suck it up. That should have, you know, a secondary voice in, you know, the political discussion. And, you know, we see, you know, a lot of that kind of percolating into our religious, you know, our political, you know, environment, not just, you know, in terms of the, you know, the blogosphere and kind of some of these areas where, you know, there's a lot more, again, chauvinism, you know, in terms of kind of religious belief or political belief, but just in our, you know, day-to-day political discourse. It's become,
I've read several things out there I did a little podcast several weeks ago about touching on kind of Christian nationalism. And there's a lot of different definitions that I found. And I was realizing that for some people, that definition kind of involved a fear that Christian Americans want to move towards a theocracy. And I that was shocking to see. I didn't know that people feared that. I think most Christians in America don't want that, aren't planning that. We're perfectly happy with our form of government. And, I think that I think it's more nuanced than a lot of the people who are labeling, people like me as Christian nationalists. It's more nuanced than that. It's like, I can believe that, yes, this country was founded on Christian principles. The majority of the founding fathers were members of Protestant churches. I can believe all that and still want total religious freedom in this country for everyone of any religion to be able to, freely practice their religion in this country, and not move towards a theocracy. I think we can say that this country was founded on Christian principles, and I'm proud to be a Christian and an American, and I'm not looking for a theocracy. I like the government how it is, and sometimes I feel like this sweeping, broader label of Christian nationalism makes it kind of erases people like me in the middle. Mm-hmm. I'm not seeing a big move towards
probably just
theocracy.
A little bit about just the foundation of the country. I mean, that they were Protestants, a lot of people during the Enlightenment, there was pressure, to adhere to one form of Christianity or not. Otherwise, you're considered a heretic. You're kind of pushed out of the discussion. A lot of the founding fathers, the majority of them, were deists, not theists. They had kind of a different concept of, and we could potentially discuss that. But yes, I mean, the country was founded particularly by people that came here seeking, fleeing religious persecution. They came here so they could practice freely. And I think you and I would, definitely agree upon that. Yes, there is a gradation, I think, in terms of the idea of Christian nationalism. And in all probability, as a gradation, we're not going to end up in a Handmaid's Tale situation anytime soon, right? Potentially we could. But we do live in a society where, there's plenty of politicians out there that are not very nuanced, that, women should not have the right to choose in any circumstance. People that are LGBTQ should have no protections or rights. They shouldn't have the right to get married. These are not necessarily atheist versus, Christian beliefs necessarily. But they are founded in certain Christian values that, for an atheist, I don't, consider those fall within the pale of morality. Right, Christianity, my perspective is Christianity tends to be overly focused on gender and sexuality, less focused on the commonality that we all agree with. Thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not, commit adultery. That, you shouldn't steal, murder. All of those things are what are core that I think we all agree on. But there's a lot of other things that, you can say, oh, it's just, sexuality and gender, but it seriously puts a lot of people in danger, right? So I have to kind of point out too is that a lot of those things are not necessarily a majority view, right? Women's right to choose, people's right to marry whom they want, is a majority held belief, despite kind of different groups trying to push for the opposite. So that's when we talk about kind of Christian nationalism light. Is pushing that agenda, leveraging a lot of the undemocratic aspects of our society to be able to push an agenda that's not popular, and is particularly draconian in terms of the punishments and so on.
Yeah, I'm gonna push back on one thing about the majority of founding fathers being deists, because we hear this so often. When I was in college, I was actually under the the opinion that most founding fathers were deists, because that was just such a part of the narrative. But reading over these past couple years, more specifically books about the founding fathers' religion, here's what I discovered. Of the 55 founding fathers at the Constitutional Convention, 28 were Episcopalian, 8 Presbyterian, 7 Congregationalists, 2 Lutheran, 2 Dutch Reformed, 2 Methodist, 2 Roman Catholic, 1 unknown, and only 3 deists, Williamson, Wilson, and of course Benjamin Franklin. So I think, and plus to be affiliated with those denominations like Episcopalian and Presbyterian back then, it was much more rigorous than it is now too. They signed, statements of agreement to the faith to join those churches. So I'm not interested in debating our founding fathers with you, but I do want to clarify that one thing, that historical record, now we don't know their hearts, exactly. And they could have been in those churches for political reasons. Maybe it was the trendy thing to do. But we do know that actually, if very few of them actually raised their hands and said, I'm a deist.
Oh, yeah. I agree. A lot of them you have to read some of their other writings and so on, where you get more of a sense of the nuance of their belief system. Totally agree. You'd probably also agree, too, that Christianity was somewhat different at the time as well. A lot of the kind of hardcore evangelical, what we call evangelicalism or fundamentalism, is quite a bit more, let's just say, aggressive, I want to say, now than it was at that time as well. So it's like, over time, people change, people's beliefs change, and religion, the way people perceive their religion changes as well. But like I said, we could debate that all day, and ultimately, for me, I don't really care, right? So there's a lot of people out there. We talked about this too. There's a lot of books out there. Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, a lot of these kind of new atheists that they are focused on trying to disprove the existence of God, or trying to find inconsistencies in the Bible. I think that's pretty pointless. Those types of arguments don't really convince anybody except yourself. It's kind of like when people go out to evangelize or proselytize. It's more for to reinforce the beliefs of the person that's doing it, than ever really expecting people to convert from atheism to religion. There's that component, and realistically, again, I've said before, I can have a profound respect for people that find solace, that find community in anything. This is a very harsh society, getting harsher in terms of a lot of things. We have the rich oligarchs trying to subvert democracy, take advantage of those of us who are middle class or working class. There's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of atomization of society, where community is rare. And I have, it's like with the Men's Alliance or any group, I appreciate that. So trying to disabuse people, and this is a lot of atheists believe this way. We just don't care. We don't give a second thought to our atheism, to somebody's religiosity. It's more kind of people bristle when it starts to impact our lives, and impact our politics.
I definitely can appreciate that. So one of the things I'm really wanting to hear your perspective on is, what do Christians like myself, like your stereotype of men in Men's Alliance, which we'll get to, but what do Christians need to hear, in your opinion? If you could hold up a mirror for us, where's the spinach in our teeth? What do we need to do differently, in your opinion?
Well, I think it's a bidirectional mirror. On one hand, it's also kind of disabusing people of some perspectives about atheism. We don't eat babies. We don't hate God. We don't worship the devil. And I've never met anybody that became an atheist so they could jettison their moral compass, right?
Right.
I'm married for 20 years. I've never cheated on my wife. I've not murdered. I've not stolen. People would probably, think that I'm pretty much equivalent of any middle of the road Christian, right? And that's typical of a lot of most atheists that are out there. Most people, you have to understand, come to atheism for very for the most part, for very specific reasons, right? Some are a very small minority of them are like me, born into a non-religious family. There's also a small percentage of us who were particularly abused by the church. And I'm not just talking about clerical abuse, sexual abuse,
right.
But they may have been, forced into conversion therapy. They may have, been a woman who wanted to have more than just kind of a traditional gender role. It runs the gamut. The majority of them are people that have, very extensive religious backgrounds. So various research has been done, Pew Research and so on, that's suggested that atheists on average have a better knowledge of the Bible than Christians or Jews in some cases.
Really?
Again, on average. And you talk to most Christians, and some of these people, they were taught by Jesuits, Catholic Jesuits, or they were born into Alabama evangelical, snake handling church, but from an early age, they learned their Bible, and they weren't convinced. They found contradictions that they weren't comfortable with, or arguments that just didn't convince them. And that's the majority of those of us who are atheists, where we come from. There's other pocket cases, right? Reasons why people, may come to atheism as well, but that's the general categories. It's not about, again, jettisoning your morality or your sense of ethics,
right?
To turn the mirror around, conversely, a lot of Christians are stereotyped, in terms of this, this rock-ribbed, kind of evangelical, belief system that believes in with seven mountains dominionism, or Catholic integralism, where every aspect of society, from media to education to economics, should be controlled by Christians, whether or not it's democratic or not. It's the moral directive from God. And a lot of people, that's kind of the extreme that a lot of, Christians get kind of pigeonholed in. And then that kind of, extends into things like, you're a gay person or trans person, and you're born into one of these families. They disown you. They push you out of the church. They push you out of their family. The perspective, there's a tendency, and this kind of gets into, perhaps some of the perspective on, say, the Men's Alliance, that there's kind of a very strict traditional gender roles that women, that men should basically dominate the family, not in a hard, heavy-handed way, but men should be the head of the family, that the woman should be submissive in kind of a biblical sense, but it all kind of percolates down to the fact that, the woman doesn't make the primary decisions in the family. It can even extend, people can even go as far, if they're extremely unknowledgeable about the community, the Christian community, might say, oh, well, they don't want women to vote. They want, or have the head of the family vote. And you do have politicians, again, it's kind of like saying that, all, Democrats or all atheists are, these perverts that, you can pull up things on the internet that show people dancing around the streets half naked, and doing stuff. On the other side too, you have these extremists that give a bad name to Christianity, that's, they stand up and say, again, women should not have the right to vote, or some people saying, states should be able to choose, whether or not to have slavery.
I've never heard anybody say that.
Again, very weird, pocket cases that tend to resonate with people. It's I think the big problem in society, either side, is anecdotal evidence. So I'm very much a mathematician in some ways. I very much believe in statistics. I do it a lot for my work. I've done it a lot for my research. And statistically, you'll find, that things aren't as they seem sometimes, versus the things that you see, as a matter of anecdote. Like I said, I can pull out any number of videos that show crazy Christians with crazy beliefs. The Reverend Locke, these things that he does, like, beats a Barbie playhouse with a bat, with a baseball bat covered in Bibles, because he feels like it violated, gender norms, or, book burnings and that type of thing.
Yeah.
But, he's not the majority of people out there. There is, obviously the fear is that, oh my gosh, we can see kind of this shift, particularly in, the MAGA movement and so on. And I don't necessarily need to get into politics, but there's this shift towards that being imbued very much by Christian nationalism, or, almost like in some cases, people that are not necessarily Christian in the sense that they're associated with any specific church or any specific belief system, but carry a lot of the same beliefs, right? About gays, and again about gender roles and so on.
So that's informative for me, just hearing you talking, because I really did not know that was the level of concern on your side. Hearing you say that
it's not a side too. I mean,
okay.
You talk to one atheist, you talk to one atheist.
I know.
It's not an ideological belief system. So it's my perspective, and it does on the non-Christian side run a gamut as well.
Sure, absolutely. I would have never known that there are people afraid of or concerned that Christians would take away women's vote or put slavery to the state vote. But hearing you say that, I'm like, yeah, I can see that. That makes sense, that the extreme of any group, that would be the fear. The fear would be that the extreme of that group becomes in power, in control, and legislates their extremism. I think to flip it around, I would say the Christian concern going in the other direction, which I believe you'll probably see as the extreme that we fear, is, you see, like you said, these people not even half naked, fully naked, dancing in the street in front of kids, celebrating sex so much that, it's definitely being said that sex is the religion of the left, because it's become, like you said about Christians, it's become such a prominent issue, more so than thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal. It's more focused on the sexual issues. And I do think
that's where there's a real commonality. Sorry, I don't mean to
no.
interrupt,
I mean, sexual
that's a real commonality, because the perspective on our side is that Christians are overtly focused on what you do with your genitalia, who you use it with, which genitalia occupies the boardroom. It's very much control sex, and society obviously shifts to the right. If you could legislate sexual morality and gender roles, countries that do that are almost naturally going to shift to the right. Middle East with Islam is a prime example. But we can also see on the other side that there is a fear that all Christian principles will be violated in society, and will end up in kind of a Sodom and Gomorrah kind of
absolutely. Like we're concerned about men with male genitals being in the women's dressing room, and these drag queens performing in elementary schools. So going the other way, that's our concern, is, oh my goodness, if we go this way as a country, we're going to be completely debauched.
Well, the thing is that, again, I work in Silicon Valley, and there's this perspective that it's, this liberal, woke community, and it's really not. I mean, most of the people are pretty much more along the lines of libertarians. And there are a lot of people that are atheists. For me, it's basically, from a social standpoint, let people do what they want to do. Nobody's forcing somebody to be gay. Nobody's forcing somebody to go to what do you call it? A trans story hour in a library. Nobody's forcing somebody to, have their kids look at this stuff. I may not morally agree with it either, right? But it's the parents. If you play on, kind of this drumbeat that you hear from the right a lot of times, parental rights. Parents can should have control over their children's what they see and what they do and what they learn. It's not just, hey, you should be able to, teach your kid, take your kid out of school and teach them biblical principles as, homeschooling. But it also falls on the other end. If you feel like you want to, expose your kids to a diversity of lifestyles, that's great. Now, do people go overboard? Like things dancing naked in front of a child? Yeah, that's ridiculous. Or somebody, I can understand the fear of having somebody with male genitalia going into female bathrooms, but it's, you're talking about 0.002% of the population. It's a pocket case that we're so focused on. Oh my gosh, what's happening with, the trans community? We should be focused on the economy. We need to be focused on people's freedoms and rights, not necessarily some of these niche issues. Now I can, from our standpoint, and again, the difference that we see is that nobody forces you to have an abortion, or nobody forces you to be trans. Nobody forces you to be gay. Nobody's, anything else. People can talk about their belief system. It's again, the First Amendment on either side. The perspective on our side, on the side that's, atheist side is that, Christians want to say, well, not only do I not want to believe abortion, I don't think anybody should have an abortion. I don't think anybody should be, have protections if you're trans or gay. I think kids should be pushed to be, straight and go through, sexual conversion therapy. There's this desire to kind of push people into, then again, this is a perspective, mm-hmm. right? The desire to, for conformity. And I think that's the ultimate, that's the perspective. And I know a lot of people on the conservative side say, oh, well, we're all for free speech and we're for freedom and the other side is for control. We see the same thing on our side, right? It's like, oh, people want to control control your bodies, control your sexuality, basically controls that force you to do something. We see it as like, well, we're just calling it as we see it. We want to have the freedom to be able to say things, people to be able to live, freely, without, imposing a worldview through, and particularly from a legal standpoint on the rest of us. And, the thing is that if you look at atheists, we have no political power. There's never been an atheist president. It's very difficult to run for office. There's a lot of companies that are, very biased towards even hiring people that are not only atheists, but of another belief system. In Silicon Valley, we're very open. There's plenty of Christians and overtly Muslim people. Most of the people I work with are Muslim or Hindu or Jewish, from Israel. People just don't talk about it, right? It's like, well, I'll hire anybody. It's considered uncouth to talk about religion in the workspace, or even, hire or fire based on that. But, I do know a lot of people, and I have people in my family that would never hire a non-Christian, that believes that, non-Christians should be marginalized and should not hold any power. And that's been, the unspoken truth in, American society, is that, as much as, people say that, atheists and ungodly people are controlling things, there's no legislation to it. It just happens that Silicon Valley requires kind of a flexibility of thinking that's not necessarily, just kind of from a worldview, doesn't function well from a conformist mindset, right? Mm-hmm. Same thing with, creativity in the media. When you're talking about creating movies and TV shows and everything else, there's a certain kind of mindset that gravitates to and contributes to those big aspects of society, to technology and the media and so on, which is kind of always considered to be, this bastions of liberality, are that way. Not, it's not that liberals are forcing, liberal beliefs on those technologies or those segments, but it's those segments require a certain kind of mindset. And it's not, again, it's you turn off the TV or you don't. Legislation is not something you can avoid, right?
But just before you go too much farther, I'm trying to keep in my head my responses for some stuff you said a couple minutes ago. So I do want to go back to, I love the way what you said sounded. Like, kind of a keep your laws off of us. We're not hurting anybody, less government, let people do whatever they want as long as they're not hurting people, kind of a vibe, which sounds like something I would totally agree with. But you mentioned abortion and, hey, no one's forcing you to have one. Of course, the counter argument is, you can see that if you do view abortion as the intentional taking of an innocent life, then it's not about who has or doesn't have an abortion. It's about the life of the baby, right? So we're not trying to tell women we don't want you to have abortions because we want to control you. We're saying we don't want you to have abortions because we don't want you to kill that baby, right? So it's not about controlling the woman. And then the other thing you mentioned
it is considered that. I mean, just from our side, go ahead.
No, and I do understand. I think we definitely understand the fact that women are feeling, hey, we want control of our bodies. We want autonomy. The motto, keep your laws off my body. No, I understand that, but there's a point where your body ends and another body just began, right? Like Oliver Wendell Holmes said, my right to swing my fist ends where your nose begins, right? And so I would view abortion as the same thing. Your right to do what you want with your body ends when it impacts the life of another body.
And that's a very novel concept. Before the 1970s, Protestants really didn't think much about, abortion. It was more kind of a province of Catholics. And there has been kind of a alliance of convenience, between Protestant Catholics and Muslims in some cases too on some of these issues. Where, again, I could point to the fact that, hey, Jewish people wrote the Old Testament. They basically started the whole thing, and they believe that life begins when you take your first breath. Not that you should have an abortion down to the last minute. Nobody wants that. But the perspective is for them it's not a baby until it's born. There's been kind of a shift in the last 20 or 30 years to say, you're talking about a zygote or a fetus that has, no consciousness. And there has been, and the right's been very, very good at this, is going from calling it a fetus, a clump of cells, to being a baby. Oh my gosh, and there's emotional resonance to the concept of a baby. Now, again, the idea of abortion being murder is a specifically, Christian view of certain types, certain segment of Christianity. Right? It's you can't lump them all on the same brush. If you poll Christians, Catholics, mainline Protestants, evangelicals, the majority do believe that people should just have the choice. There's probably about 30% of the people that believe this is an absolute moral wrong, and it's the scourge of our time.
So other one,
it's that difference in belief system.
Okay, just to keep it moving, the other one you mentioned. And I think this one is a really good one to spend a minute on because it's very big in the current cultural conversation is you mentioned, LGBTQ rights and them being protected. And these are some of the words you're hearing right now in media's rights and protection and at risk and harm and danger, right? There's this, kind of this picture being painted of we have to protect through laws this at-risk group from being harmed. That's the way it's being phrased. The thing that maybe you can help me understand about this that I don't get is it's illegal to harm anyone, right? Like you can't, I mean, assault is illegal regardless of the sexual preference of the person being assaulted. So, like, it's already illegal to hit somebody and kick somebody. Why is there this feeling that this group needs extra protections? Nobody's allowed to hit them. Nobody's allowed to hurt them. And you don't see it. I don't see it happening.
So, the thing is that, and I understand where you're coming from. There's a perspective, I think, on the right that these are special rights. And really, it's nothing, even if they were special rights, which I don't think they are, it doesn't hurt anybody else, right?
I guess, let me ask this specifically. What is the right that they need? What right do we need to give them that they don't have?
Well, a number of things. I mean, I'm not talking about a Matthew Shepard situation where somebody's, killed and murdered and left to die, on a country road. That is illegal. I think the additional penalties for hate crimes is also to kind of help change kind of the perspective in society that vilifies these groups more than others. And it's, some of it's racial. So you can say the same thing about racial issues, or you can talk about gays. But a lot of the problem is not whether their lives are in danger, right? A lot of it has to do with discrimination in terms of housing. That if you're in a heavily evangelical community where 99% of the people or 90% of the people in Alabama are Christian, and aggressively so in some cases, where do you expect these people to live? You want to be, you're a Christian person who owns a grocery store, the only grocery store in your town. You should be able to, say, discriminate against, or be able to say you have a right not to sell to this person.
Well, I would certainly agree with you. I would certainly agree with you there, right? As a Christian, I would certainly, rent my house or apartment complex to them, and I think all Christians should, and sell them food from my grocery store. And I definitely agree that all Christians should. So I would say I completely agree with you on those laws, if that's the laws that are.
And I know
are
a lot
concern.
of Christians are very sensitive to that, right? They're sensitive to the, that's the whole remit of, the Beatitudes and kind of the original kind of beliefs of Jesus. This is to help the poor, help the indigent,
Sure.
Help people that may be social outcasts like that. There is a huge segment of, Christianity that's that way. There's also the other side that's very almost Old Testament, and you hear people, and again, it's fringy, people should be, executed for being gay. People should be, again, it's a fringe viewpoint, but there is a segment of society that's not love the sinner, hate the sin, but it's hate the sinner, hate the sin as well. And people, kicking their kids out because they find out they're gay, and the kids, end up on the street having to turn tricks. That's awful.
Yeah, that is awful. The group that I see, and it's all perspective on where you are. The group that I see being the most targeted, if there was a group at risk, I would say it's definitely Jewish people right now. They're being targeted everywhere. Europe,
look, I
college campuses.
I lived in Israel. I lived in Israel for went to school there. I've been in Israel more times than I can count for business and otherwise. I was there right, a few months before October 7th. I have a huge respect for that community. And I have a lot of friends that are Israeli, and they are having a heck of a time. Europeans, their historical anti-Semitism is showing itself. Even, again, these technically secular, fascist parties that are coming into power, very much propagating that kind of those anti-Semitic tropes. my perspective on that whole, conflict, and a lot of the people believe this as well, agree on the left. I side with those people that don't kill gay people, don't kill Christians, don't kill atheists, that aren't, suicide bombing and treating women like shit.
Right.
Sorry. Pardon my French.
No, you're fine. You can say anything you want on this podcast.
and it's also, but also there is an element on the left as well that's taken a lot of the propaganda about genocide or whatever. I mean, there is a, I come from academia, I can say this. There is kind of a sense that the colonizer, and they're not colonizers, but Israelis are lumped into that pot. The colonizers are always wrong, and the people on the other side are obviously the oppressed. And there's no matter, the moral, there's no moral equivalency, no matter how horrific the crimes are on one side, in this situation, that those who think of themselves as being oppressed are in the right, doing whatever they want to do, and even kind of a soft glove in the Middle East is considered abusive or considered genocide. I mean, in the Middle East, there's a lot of things that you could say. You could say that the Israelis have actually, compared to a lot of militaries, have handled this very softly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Compared to, it would be probably a nuclear crater if it had been the U.S. or Russia that had been attacked. It's different, right? So, but my point is that yes, Jewish people are vilified, Muslims as well. I mean, in this country as well, because of this whole conflict, we've seen both sides get abused. And it really depends on the moment, right? We remember during COVID, there were a number of people that were attacked and killed for being Asian, because the whole perspective that this whole thing was concocted in Asia. There is a huge amount of ignorance to go around, whether you're Christian or whether you're atheist or anything in between.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that.
There's so much poor education is so poor, and there's so much ignorance flying around that there's no shortage of it.
Martin, I want to shift gears a little bit and ask you, atheism, belief there is no God, agnosticism, you can't know if there is a God. Where would you put yourself? Are you 100% atheist? Are you 50-50 agnostic atheist? Where would you put yourself between the ratio or the balance of there's absolutely no God and we just can't know? Amen. Has money gotten in the way of how God can use you? Let me tell you about Tom Love, certified financial planner with the Main Street Group. Tom Love from Tuckahoe Tribe, a.k.a. Doc, can absolutely get you squared away with your finances. My wife and I use Doc to handle our personal finances, and his team is second to none. Tom is a certified financial planner. He's a Dave Ramsey SmartVestor Pro. He's been ranked top 40 under 40. He's been ranked number 2 in Richmond Times-Dispatch. He's been featured in the Wall Street Journal. And make sure you mention Men's Alliance whenever you reach out to Doc. He gives Men's Alliance, Tip of the Spear Ministries, a portion of the proceeds when you invest through him. He's a fee-only fiduciary, which means he doesn't make money unless you make money. So check out Tom Love at the Main Street Group.
There's kind of a false separation between the two. For me, I said this in the beginning. Atheism is a state where the arguments for the existence of a deity are not convincing you. That's basically it. Beyond that, I couldn't give much more thought, again, except for the political element, to atheism or theism or deism or anything else. That's just a state. It's like, hey, you have not proven to me that, disproven my lack of belief and proven a belief, and then the burden of proof is on, on those that are, that are trying to prove something, not proving a negative.
Okay.
Agnostic is, and a lot of people say that agnosticism kind of sits underneath atheism. Okay, so I haven't been proven. It hasn't been proven to me. Now, what is my approach to the evidence? Well, most people are, you're agnostic in the sense that, I'm open to it. If somebody showed me, God thundered down from the clouds and there was a burning bush, talking burning bush in front of me, or somebody was able to show any sort of evidence, you'd be a fool not to accept it. Now, the other side is somewhat a fiction. It's kind of like a lot of when you talk about talk about the extremes on the Christian side. There are people that say I hate God and I hate religion and I hate, I definitely don't believe in God. That's a fairly small number of people. There is a large number of people that say I don't like religion because of, people are added to the mix. It's not just a pure ideology. For me, religions are basically an ideology with some additional components to it, but it's not just ideological. When ideology gets of any sort, capitalism, socialism, communism, they may look interesting or have some value, theoretically, but as soon as you kind of bring humans in the mix, the real world, you always have the problems of humans themselves. So there's a lot of people out there on the atheist side that say, I don't like the church. And there's a lot of things that I could criticize it as well. But in terms of how you're perceiving God, there aren't that many people that say, I absolutely know there is no God. Now, I tend to, for myself, if I'm looking at the evidence or how I kind of rationally think about the world, I would say that I'm more tempted to believe that there is not a God versus there is a God, right? And again, some of that just has to do with the way my brain works. So, I tend to be kind of very logical in terms of show me the facts, show me the logical thread and the proof. And religion is not, religion is not that way. If you had asked me before, like if I had, what is the best argument for atheism, right? Then I have to say there isn't one. There isn't a great, if an argument is based on how effective it is, there are no arguments that are effective one way or the other, because much of what is, about religion, it's a feeling, it's emotion, it's, how you're, it's how your community, how your family conceives of community. There's a lot more factors than some sort of a logical discussion about, again, scientific proofs. There are none. There are no scientific proofs that there is no God. There are no, arguments, no matter how well thought out they are, that point out the discrepancies in the Bible or errancies in the Bible that would convince somebody who's faithful, right? Maybe I'm, talking a little bit in circles here, but the same thing can, if you kind of turn a mirror on atheists, there is no logical discussion to be had about the existence or non-existence of a deity.
So, my personal story, for me, my Christian faith has nothing to do with feelings. I'm a very rational guy, and I looked into the evidence for it, and so that's why I'm curious, and I enjoy having these conversations. And it's also why I read books by atheists, because I want to know their best arguments. I want to examine everything from both sides. So I've read Hitchens, Dawkins, Bart Ehrman, misquoting Jesus. I've tried to study all that I can from both sides, And I'm just a Christian because I came to my conclusion that there's really good evidence. There's really good evidence that it's a true story. And I thought it would be fun, to ask you if we had to switch sides of the table, how they do in like, school debate teams, is now you have to argue the other side. Mm-hmm. What do you find as what's the best argument you've heard for the existence of God? And I'll play too. I will give you the best argument that I have for atheism if you give me your best argument for theism.
That's a difficult one because obviously I'm having to think about what would convince me as an atheist, and that's why I say there is no evidence outside of kind of a very encapsulated. You can have logical arguments, but if they're bounded by preconceptions, then you can be as logical as you want. But if your starting point is an error or making assumptions.
I agree with you 100%. Some people come in with their mind already made up that such and such is not going to be acceptable.
I'll tell you where and this is kind of has to do with the human brain, and kind of where I think the best argument for theism, for the existence of a God lies. And it probably resonates with a majority of people because of the way that their brain thinks. And that's the idea of teleological thinking. That is that every action in nature otherwise has a purpose, has a reason. There is a reason why I'm here. There's a reason for my life. There's a reason that the universe was created, right? If you have that as a precept, then, the logical conclusion is that who did the creating, right? Who provided that, that value, to my life or to the universe or whatever. For me, I lack that for various reasons. For various reasons, I don't believe that there is a meaning to anything in that sense. Meaning in my life is very kind of constrained by my existence. My life is important because to my wife. My life is important to my dog, my family, my people. That my life has value, or has a reason based on the world that I've touched, right? And so the idea that there needs to be a reason why the universe was created, the reason why I'm here, what my purpose doesn't resonate with me. But that argument is something that resonates with most people because teleological thinking is a prerequisite for the notion of an anthropomorphic God. That is, again, there must be a prime mover or creator if we assume that the world was created. I don't particularly think the universe was ever created. Nothing is ever created and destroyed. That's the prime point of
thermodynamics
science is that material energy and matter are never created or destroyed. They're just transformed into different forms, and I think that's been the case forever, right? It's an eternal state. There's nothing was created. That's my personal belief. So somebody like me would be very hard to use that argument against, but probably I'd say 80% of the population that does think teleologically, that would resonate with, and there's an evolutionary reason for it as well, because we're inherently communal creatures. We're community and connection are very important, and that kind of thinking is in the back of our minds. If connections are important, it's kind of extrapolated to kind of more esoteric ideas, beyond kind of the human experience. That would be my best argument.
No, that's really good. That makes a lot of sense. I'll give you what I think is the best and worst arguments. First, I'll give you my if I were an atheist, I think that the best argument out there for atheism is the problem of suffering and evil, right? I just think, and it's not the logical part of that. It's the emotional part of that. I think, when an atheist says, if there were a God, then why would he allow, childhood cancer? I think that's the whopper. There is no great answer. On the Christian side of that, to try to reply, it is, we don't always know, right? We don't know God's plan. We trust that he has one and he will work things out for good. But, there was a survey done a couple of years ago of, Americans from all demographic. If you could ask God one question, what would it be? And that was the number one question that people would ask God is, why do you allow so much suffering? And it doesn't logically have any problem with the existence of God, but it definitely has a strong emotional one. So that would be what I think is the strongest case against the existence of an all-loving, all-powerful God. But, when you... Go ahead.
I'd have to say that it's powerful for an atheist, because somebody who's an ex-Christian or ex-Catholic, particularly hardcore, they ask those questions a lot, or people that have experienced suffering. But in terms of convincing a Christian of that,
right.
The thing is that we've for the last 2,000 years, longer if you're talking about biblical analysis on the Old Testament. Mm-hmm. There has been 2,000 years of apologetics that have explained away inconsistencies in everything from the idea that there's multiple stories of Genesis to whatever it is, and there are arguments that resonate on the Christian side that we cannot know God's will, that there may be purpose behind suffering, and so on. So if I'm an atheist, I would not necessarily, I would personally wouldn't find that, just kind of putting myself in a Christian's head, I wouldn't find that particularly convincing to me. It's a good argument. Why would a God do X, Y, Z? But the perfect response for it is that we're just limited human beings. We don't know, and it's kind of like an ex machina argument that it's like, hey, there's this thing here that explains everything, but it's kind of a little bit of a black box and kind of a bit of a Hail Mary. Not to dismiss that, but again, there's been 2,000 years of very powerful thinkers who have come up with a lot of these apologetic arguments.
Yeah, I do think you're totally right. I think there's also a lot of people who have walked away from various faiths, especially Christianity, because of going through some sort of personal tragedy in their life, the loss of a loved one, the loss of a family member, and it's kind of a little bit hard to distinguish sometimes. In some conversations, they'll say they've stopped believing in God, but sometimes I wonder if it's not the case that actually they're just mad at him. Right.
That's a perfect point. And that's kind of a weird situation for somebody mentally, right? And it doesn't necessarily push people into the atheist,
Sure.
atheist side. Like I said, somebody like me, and again, you're talking to one atheist, is not a matter of, thinking of atheism as an ideology or there's no thought behind it. There's no consistent, there's conservative, atheists, there's liberal atheists, there's atheists of every different kind. Anything beyond, not being, convinced of arguments for the existence of God, it's no holds barred. So, that's. I lost my train of thought a little bit there, but what was the key point there?
I'm not sure, but I'll go to the next one.
Sure.
I think I'll give you what I think is the worst argument for atheism And I'm going to use Peter Singer as an example. Are you familiar with him? He's ethics professor at Princeton, written quite a bit, and he is a very consistent atheist with his worldview, holding to neo-Darwinism, and we are no different than highly evolved cockroaches. There's no existential difference between a human and a bacteria or an animal. So he's playing that out logically, and he says that it's more tragic. It's a greater loss for humankind on this planet, the death of an adult pig than the death of a baby human.
I'm not sure what the logic is there. A baby human, I mean, if you're talking about a fetus, but if, once somebody is born, there's obviously a difference. For me, that yes, evolution for myself, is highly, is highly probable. It's a theory, but it's highly probable, the evolution of one form to a next, and humans being kind of the apex of that. I think the difference is that that to say that humans are categorically different than animals, you have to believe in the notion of a soul, that humans have a soul and no other creature does. But this is where things get really tricky. Mm-hmm. We're probably depending on who you talk to, we're not that far away from a AI that's the generalized AI that has the capability of thinking almost indistinguishable from a human. And I deal with a lot of AI, and it's scary for me how far it's advanced, how quickly. If you have something that's basically talks and thinks and sounds, and even in some cases feels like a human being, is it still kind of a non-sentient, non-human entity? It does, it brings up the question of consciousness. Mm-hmm. And unless you hold tightly to the concept of a soul, which nobody has proven the existence of a soul, at least, again, not to my satisfaction, there is no distinction, right? And even if you think of you think of somebody who's mentally impaired, some of them can't think beyond what a dog can think. Dogs and animals are very smart in a lot of ways, and they're also very empathetic in a lot of ways.
Sure.
So much of the humans. Where's the distinction there, right? And
that's what I think is a very big argument for theism and a soul, and against atheism, because when you read Peter Singer, or if you just talk about a dog compared to a human. Huge dog lover myself. I've got a great lab, and when we lost our last lab, I cried. I'm a dog lover. I'm very emotionally attached, but still, I believe that all humans know in our hearts that the death of an animal, even a Labrador Retriever, is not as great a loss as the death of a human, even if that human is 2 years old or mentally impaired. I just believe that we all know in our hearts that humans have an intrinsic value. And when you read Peter Singer, I mean, I can't imagine anyone reading it and not flinching at that horrific argument he makes. And that's, to me, why I think we're obviously different from the animals. We can't possibly be put in the same category as any of them. The loss of a human is tragic. I think we all know that. Now, the big question is, why is that? Why do we all know that?
The question is, too, I mean, and this is my perspective, we always talk about, humanism. Oh, you're overly focused on the human experience, the human condition. That's, and it's kind of been, from the religious side that it denies spirituality and everything else. I actually think the most humanistic, human focused ideology is actually religion, because at least from my perspective, we created God. It's basically God. Anthropomorphic God is just like us, only omnipotent, omnipresent, eternal, and so on, but basically has the same emotions and responses as a human, in terms of getting angry, in terms of getting jealous, and in terms of a lot of different things. At least again from my side, from my perspective, that Christian religion is somewhat narcissistic. It's like humans are most important.
Yeah, I can see that.
Everything with whether it's God, God is God, and the face of man are just reflections of each other.
We are made in the image of God.
Exactly, and that's where you lose atheists. It's like you see it as maybe being very limiting or cold to say there is no purpose to the universe, there is no creator to the universe, and I understand the comfort that it gives to think that there is purpose, that humans are important beyond anything else. And for me, it's like I'd never murder somebody any more than anybody else would. It's like there's a inherent, the human value. If nothing else, for me, I wouldn't. It's kind of like the golden rule. I wouldn't want to be treated any differently from anybody else. I'm not going to murder because I don't want to be murdered, right? And that's. We can agree on that, but I don't feel discomfort or a sense of loss or a sense of being, why just throw my hands up and why should I be living? Why should I even be living? Not believing that there was, purpose behind everything, that there isn't a creator, that there isn't somebody who's basically a paternal, all-powerful paternal, power that I can turn to in cases of, in cases of me feeling lost or me feeling powerless or what have you. It just doesn't resonate with me. And so again, to bring it around, Christianity is more humanistic, human focused, versus universal. Whereas like I look at universally that there are mechanical laws of physics that are behind everything. That's where, and I'm comfortable with that. It actually gives me a huge degree of comfort. But it's just, again, it's a difference of perspective and a difference in terms of what resonates with you personally.
Yeah. You mentioned, kind of at the onset here that you've never found any good evidence or any convincing or persuasive evidence for the existence of God. Do I have your permission to give you one?
Sure, of course. I'm open.
I would love to give you just one. And, I think some of the most classical, you mentioned 2,000 years of apologetics, I think some of the most classical arguments for the existence of God, the cosmological argument, the teleological argument, the ontological argument, I don't think those bring people to theism. I don't think they change minds. I think they're very good arguments. I think they're very solid, but I don't think they really have changed anybody. But this one that I like, it actually has. We have plenty of people who have been converted to theism because of this argument and written books about it, and that is DNA. I think DNA is hands down the best current piece of evidence for the existence of an intelligent designer. And we had no knowledge of what was inside of a cell. In the 1850s when Darwin was writing, they thought the cell was the smallest thing. Now, of course, we open it up and it's full of little machines. And those are full of things, right? And now we know, that DNA is digitally encoded information. I love the quote from Bill Gates. He says, DNA is like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than any software ever created. So, this is the evidence that converted Anthony flew from atheism to theism. I don't think there's a way to explain the arrival of such highly complex and specified information other than to say that there must be an information giver. Information doesn't come from nothing. Information always comes from an information giver. So that's what I think is the best, most compelling piece of evidence for an intelligent designer.
Some people maybe find that resonant. I don't think necessarily you can extrapolate God from what you consider God's works, right? Just because something is unexplainable doesn't automatically force you to jump from to the idea that there must be a divine creator. Again, that's very human focused. The way that we think, the way that we cogitate and create things, and humans never really created anything, right? Most a car is not a matter of creation; it's a matter of transformation of different materials into a car, right? It's not you're not ex nihilo creating something from nothing. But the idea of creation and the idea of developing things is a very kind of a human notion. From my standpoint, there are mechanical, I don't want to say laws, and this is no lawgiver, but just because of the dynamics of the way matter and energy interact, it forces. There are rules to that interaction, and that over time, it's kind of like there is a kind of a random component there up to some point, where you combine chemicals in a certain degree with electricity and so on over millions and millions and millions of years. There's always the probability that life can be generated. I think in some cases it's almost guaranteed. That life will be generated from that. I know you wouldn't agree to that, but the universe and the universal laws are far more complex and far more beautiful in some ways than anything else you can imagine. And if the physical world was slightly different, the laws would be slightly different because they'd be based on that particular reality. If you believe in the multiverse, there could be other places where the laws of the universe work very differently, right? Not that I'm not saying I believe in the multiverse concept, but all I'm saying is that that you can't extrapolate the creator from his creation in that direction. If you have to make an assumption that things are created and that there must be a human equivalent, but on a much higher level, to create, to create that.
Yeah, I guess that's now I think we're really like fundamentally right where you and I would diverge and part ways. You're right. It is possible that laws and the intricacies of matter over time and stuff could have done something, but I don't think it's probable. And there's things like multiverse. I see this as a just so invention to combat the teleological argument, right? It doesn't really answer anything. It just kicks the can further down the road. It's like atheists are having a hard enough time explaining the existence of this universe and how it got here, and their answer is going to be, well, maybe there's more universes. So now your problem just got bigger. Where's this machine that's creating universes?
Yeah, and I've never heard that argument on the atheist side and saying that the multiverse has to do with probabilities and spinning off multiple variants of any action. From my perspective, the universe is eternal. We talk about it being 14 billion years old, and there was nothing behind, but before that, but there wasn't, right? There was a thing. The probable theory is that there was a singularity that basically exploded, or because of instabilities within that singularity, created the universe. But what was before that could have, because time and space were all intricately intertwined, you could either say that it was that it's eternal just because basically time began at that point, or you could think of a constantly expanding and contracting universe of matter and energy.
Right. So that's
not actually forever.
That's in that category.
This is all speculation. And that's
exactly. That's what I was going to say. It's in a category of stuff that you could say maybe, but I would say this: there's no evidence. There's no evidence.
Exactly. There's evidence in terms of how the universe exploded. They can
yes,
see
but
back.
There's no evidence that it has contracted and exploded again.
Exactly, and that's the difference here.
Yeah.
As somebody who believes as I do, there's no proof. There's evidence, but it's whether it's convincing or not, I don't know. But I don't always automatically jump. Well, we don't know. The universe must have done it. It's not. It's for religionists, the automatic default for anything, if you don't know it, is God. It must be God's will. God created it. What have you? And it's a great explanation. It's an easy explanation, but it doesn't. It's to me again, it's not convincing. For a lot of those, and it doesn't really matter. Me, this discussion.
It's for fun. It's a fun conversation. I'm not trying to convince you.
Oh no, I completely agree. But if you were to talk to somebody, there's people that are a lot more intelligent than I am on this situation, well versed. You talk to Dawkins, you talk to Christopher Hitchens, you talk about a lot of other people that
we're trying to get them on here.
I'm sure, but you spend your time focused on that. Focused on again trying to disprove God. That's their province. Again, religion and atheism hold no interest to me.
Right.
Cogitating on the nature of the universe and everything else, there are things that I can't explain. I follow the science as far as I can. I think my focus and kind of bring things around. My focus with this book, the focus in terms of my life, why I even give any attention to atheism or religion, as a whole, is because of its tangible physical impact on society. We talk about there is no evidence for the existence of God. There is plenty of evidence for the impact of religions on society, and I work backwards from that, and I say, is that impact a net negative or net positive? Is it something that we should propagate, or is it something that we should fight against? And, in particular, when I'm talking about the problem that I see is this politicized and weaponized religion that's gotten overly intertwined with, running the world, that is causing trouble. I can't remember what it is. I think it's Matthew 16:26 that says, "What benefits a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul?" Mm-hmm. And I think that's from a Christian standpoint, that's impactful.
Yeah.
But I also think it can be applied to human communities as a whole. What benefits Christianity, the Christian body, the Christian ideology or theology, if you gain control of the world but lose your soul in the process? We saw it happen with Catholicism in the Middle Ages. It had control over, and this is my next book that's that I'm working on, is that the church controlled politics, and it became corrupted and polluted to the point that you had the Reformation and you had Protestantism, which is basically had its own scrapes in terms of trying to move too much into politics, and from my standpoint, looking from the outside, I look at Jesus as being a man of peace. Again, if he existed or anything else, irregardless of his divinity, he was a man of peace. He was a man of, mercy and what a lot of people, and I've heard a lot of people that still go to church, hearing their people going to the pastor and say, "Why are you talking about all this woke stuff? Well, Jesus wasn't this woke, weak little man. He's this muscular Jesus that today he'd be a gun-toting, all-American guy that busts heads and fights against the forces of that are aligned against Christianity and so on. And then that's and I've heard that argument from Christians that Jesus was really a soldier for God, and he was much more tough and judgmental than the Bible. I think a lot of the politicization of religion has pulled the notions and the basic tenets of Christianity into a very almost Old Testament, fire and brimstone, punishment and reward kind of a dynamic, because politics to a certain degree demands that perspective, and that's that's just how I see it.
I think everyone.
One thing we didn't get into is kind of the perception of the men's alliance from the outside. And I think that's something that's, I want to touch on. And again, I'm coming from a standpoint, where I value, again, community and, anywhere people can get a sense of brotherhood and so on. I think, for me, and again, you can dismiss it as kind of, again, coastal elite kind of insular thinking. But, I look at it as, and don't take it wrong, it's pretty harsh. I look at men's alliance, and a lot of groups like it, and I see it as kind of being part and parcel of the manosphere. This kind of Andrew Tate, Tucker Carlson, testicular tanning and trying to build up your manhood, and this kind of cult of the alpha male, which I hate that, because it's such a corruption of scientific concepts. But I see these people as being anything but a bunch of men, men that are feeling lost in society, that feel like there's been a feminization of society, that feel like, they haven't been trained to be proper men. And that, there's this kind of bravado that's under, that masks a huge amount of insecurity. For me, I'm a man. I'm well muscular. I've got a beard. I've owned guns. I live on basically what we considered a farm. My family's from Montana, cowboys kind of a thing. I have, respect, whether or not it should be demanded, of manhood, masculinity. But I think that the manosphere has tended to what we consider toxic masculinity. I know people think, oh, this means that you can't be a real man. Toxic masculinity.
No, I totally get what you're saying.
Toxic masculinity is things like Andrew Tate, that women are basically your sex toys.
And I completely agree with you. And Men's Alliance is not a follower of Andrew Tate.
I read through your website and so on, but I think the perspective, again,
right.
It's the pejorative and the kind of preconceived notions that we bring to the table, that it is, less, a kind of building your alpha male, building your leader, versus, again, insecure, I'll say beta males or men trying to aspire to be, this constructed image of the traditional man. I think that's one component. I think the other component that's distressing, or against the assumption, is that you have a call sign Goose because you were in the Air Force or something, and I know that there's always a concern that it comes across as being kind of a very right wing militia filled with ex-military, very kind of conservative, conformist, ex-military, ex-police. You combine that with Christianity, and it becomes kind of like a toxic brew for kind of right-wing Christian militia kind of thing, like 3%ers and Proud Boys, kind of Proud Boys, if not that, adjacent. And I think that's the kind of perspective. I think the third component of this has to do with traditional roles. So like men's, I think men should stand up and be proper role models for their sons and daughters, that they need to stand up and do what's necessary to, they're 50% of bringing somebody into the world. They're responsible for paying their child support if they're divorced. They're responsible for trying to make their marriage work, and so on. where I take exception is this kind of like paternalistic, there's Jesus at the top, and the man has God defined roles and power in the family, and the wife is not necessarily submissive, but defers to the man as the leader of the family in kind of almost a beneficial, and a beneficent way, but it's kind of perceived as kind of a bird in a gilded cage, and this kind of very hierarchical thing. So those three components that could be an argument, against, the men's alliance. And if it's not that those are notions that should be disabused, and it's very tough, it's very tough. It's a nuanced argument to tease masculinity from toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
From doing your role as a husband to being, to some degree being the final arbiter in decisions in the family and really dictating to another human being that has equal rights just because they're a different gender.
Yeah.
And then, again, the militia thing is difficult because anytime you see men doing manly things with other men, there's kind of the concept of this is very, paternalistic, very kind of toxic, and particularly throwing kind of that kind of militia kind of feel and Christianity together. That's always a red flag for those of us are on this side of the equation.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. I would say to your first one, that's an easy one. We're just straight up not that, right? We're not a part of the women hating Andrew Tate crowd. Your second one was definitely surprising to me. I think it's very interesting that you arrived at that thought based on most of us being veterans, that and law enforcement, right? So to me, that's, an interesting stereotype that you have that I just learned something about, right?
You look at the 3%ers, and they are mostly very conservative, very traditionalist, and there is like as a component of the military. My father's ex-military, 20 years, Vietnam vet. My grandfather was a World War II vet, decorated both of them. So it's not like I'm disparaging the military.
You're not a Quaker.
Yeah, exactly. I don't disparage them in any way, but there is a tendency to be more conservative, at least amongst the enlisted. And a lot of my father was an officer, and so it's more of a mix. But you look at the enlisted,
right?
You look at police, that it's more kind of, I don't want to say blue collar, but there is kind of like a perspective that's more authoritarian. I want to say authoritarian in kind of a not necessarily a negative standpoint. That believe that there is a proper way to be.
Yeah, it's like a black and white, right and wrong.
Right, black. Yeah. It's very black and white, right and wrong. That it's deferring, authoritarian in the sense that you defer to authority. Things are very hierarchical, and that's fine. But then you look at the 3%ers, and there's a concern that this organ is in support of some very anti-democratic, anti-freedom kind of, as much as they say otherwise, is difficult. I think why you probably get, for me, would put that together. I don't necessarily say there's anything bad about a bunch of military and ex-police getting together, but you combine that with a particularly conservative, evangelical view of Christianity, and the assumption is that you're building kind of a army of God, that's potentially going to be overly aligned with any potential authoritarian right-wing government that arises. Because you look at any, my wife is she's similar belief system as I am, but if you read my book, she's Iranian. She fled a horribly oppressive environment, and the people that enforce morality. There's a prevention, the promotion of virtue and the prevention of vice, the besiege. They were all drawn from the military and the police because there's that resonance of authoritarian control, power, combined with religion, which is often considered a kind of a toxic brew. Now, if you guys, and again, if this is a incorrect reading of, you guys, and I think this is kind of like with Christianity, disabusing a lot, I think it's the most important thing that you guys could do as a group is disabuse the world of those misconceptions of, again, being toxically masculine, being kind of a pseudo militia, / Christian, army of God kind of a thing. That would be very powerful, because without those things, there's a huge way, there's a high degree of resonance, men across the political spectrum, where that message could resonate.
I see what you're saying. I totally get that. That's really good feedback. Your third one about the the hierarchy of the family, about God and then the husband and then the wife. I'm going to agree with you on. I'm going to agree that we are that. But I would say we didn't make that up. That's what Paul wrote in Ephesians. So you can't blame us for that one. You can take that up with Paul.
The funniest thing, that the one person in the Bible that I take exception to that corrupted, to me.
Yeah.
I'm a medievalist, and I did a lot of stuff. About biblical
Paul
study.
Hijacked the gospel.
He hijacked it. He concocted a story around Jesus' divinity in such a way that it's in a lot of ways corrupted the original message. But I think particularly in terms of, he was not particularly, how should I say, he was definitely not a feminist that believed in female equality. He was in a lot of ways a misogynist. But that's just me, right? It's like, I understand where your thinking has come from. It is completely biblical if you accept Paul as kind of the ultimate, contributor to biblical thinking. That's understandable. I think where that becomes problematic is that, from my standpoint, and this is maybe something you can't get over. Somebody like myself, I believe men and women are completely equal. Yes, do they have strengths and weaknesses in certain points? Yes, but it doesn't prevent a woman from being an awesome soldier. It doesn't prevent a woman from being a great CEO. It doesn't prevent a man from being a great stay-at-home husband, or more of a nurturing type, right? So, and it's basically, again, it's a freedom thing that I believe in, ultimate freedom for people to choose. And if they can do it, if they can hack it, fine. If they can't, then it's just, it's just a natural thing. Not all men can be soldiers. Not all men can be,
No, I would totally agree with you. I think that you're going after a caricature of what we believe. I don't think that. I mean, I can't say that. I'm sure there's some small church somewhere that does say that, but I don't think it's a mainstream Christian view that women shouldn't be soldiers or CEOs. I think that,
in the sense that the extrapolation there is that there are traditional roles that are appropriate for men, and there's a large percentage of the Christian groups that and maybe it's a matter of also changing the language, that if a man is kind of the protector of the family, he's the decision maker. Eve is the rib bone of Adam, and it was created as his helpmate, which is kind of a subordinate role. Whether or not you remember the book, the section of my book that talks about women's role in religion and potential role in atheism, that that women have been put on a pedestal. At the same time, it's more of like a bird in a gilded cage, that you put them on a pedestal, but you basically don't give them the similar rights to men. And then again, there's a lot of religious baggage in terms of part of the denial of women's right to vote. Women are not smart enough, and they're not, they're it's outside of their wheelhouse. They should, and there's a push right now in many churches that women should not be preaching because, women they're too emotional, or they don't understand the Bible enough to be able to communicate it. Or the Bible says that men should be the ones to lead the church, lead the family. And that's not my worldview.
Sure. Yeah. No, I understand that.
It's variable amongst religions.
I just think what I'm trying to illustrate to our listeners is, yes, the man is the head of the house. He's the protector and provider, but that does not mean that the woman cannot run for president of the United States. That doesn't mean that the woman cannot, be CEO of a company. In fact, we've had a couple of women on this podcast who are extraordinarily successful, one in the political arena, one as an author. And both of them said, families and homes work best when there are traditional roles, and these women are extraordinarily successful. So I'm creating that balance there that lets people know there is a view of, yes, we can say masculinity is important, strength is necessary, men are called to be the head of the house, but that doesn't look like domineering, right? They're to love their wife the way Christ loved the church, which is sacrificially and dying for her, right? So I think that
I don't understand that argument. It's just, again, it's the wording that is kind of like, I'll protect you, little lady, kind of thing, that you're not. There's certain things that men are, called to do or is important for them, and that's fine, But there's again, this whole argument. There's kind of like a generally accepted or acceptable perspective. And then there's the toxic side of that. And I think if you guys are on the healthy side of it, that the best thing you can do is try to disabuse yourself from that toxic, and maybe in a lot of ways it is a stereotype or worst case scenario. That's the best thing you can do to be able to grow your influence.
I completely agree with you. And if you've got ideas on how to do that, I would love to hear them, because I think I've tried to do that, but obviously I haven't done it enough. And it's amazing how much people do get triggered by just seeing, like, we'll just do like a social media post. It's just like a couple guys working out together, and you just get crushed with the hate comments about how, we must be fascist that hate women. You're like, men can't even get together and work out together without doing that. If there's a way to let people know that's not us, I would love to hear it. But what I'm seeing is that's just everybody's assumption, and there's nothing you're going to do to change some people's mind. If there's guys working out outdoors together, we must be Nazis.
Yeah, and like I said, there's a lot of that. There's certain people you won't convince.
Right.
It's like when I promote my book. You've read my book. There's nothing in there that's anti-religion.
Right. You're not going to try to market your book to everybody, and we're not going to try to market Men's Alliance to everybody.
Oh, well, but it's not that. It's regardless of marketing, I think people look at the title, and I get so much hate anytime I advertise it. Similar to you do, side. Oh, you're stupid. You're whatever it is, you're anti-God, you're going to hell, all this kind of stuff. I get plenty of that.
I'm sorry to hear that, by the way.
Oh, it rolls off my back.
I know it does, but still, it bothers me.
But in the same way with you guys, it's bi-directional. That there's a bunch of people out there that are horrible that you'll never convince, but there is a middle ground, and a lot of it, for you and for me as well, it's linguistic, right? There's a lot of stuff and I talk about in the book as well, and I think it'd be great, because I'm very much into linguistics. There's a lot of inherent Christianity and language built into our language and built into our laws. And so
that's true.
And the more that you can extract that,
that's how we were founded.
Exactly. But the more that you extract that, look at the we don't talk about God in the what do you call it, Constitution. It's in the Declaration of Independence. But my point,
the hand of the Almighty.
Not to get distracted, but what I'm saying is that the more that you can extract those loaded terms out of your language, but yet still say the same thing, help smooth that over that communication gap, because there's certain things about faith and protection and so on that that resonate poorly outside of the traditional Christian community.
Understood.
And, I don't have, we obviously spent a lot of time on this, but that extraction is incredibly difficult. It's something that atheists would love to be able to do, is to extract that from our language and from a lot of the residue of our older laws. But it should be, again, to keep the intent of Christianity, to keep the intent of Christianity separate from a lot of the toxic Christianity that we see, the politicized Christianity. It's incumbent of Christians themselves to a certain degree have an alliance with the non-Christians in this sense, because it facilitates open communication. Because there may be some things that a lot of atheists are, believe in a lot of the things that you guys do structurally and conceptually, but may not resonate just because of the language used.
Well, I appreciate that. And you would be absolutely welcome to any men's alliance. If we get one in California, we're not there yet, but we're moving towards you. Hey, as we wrap this up, you quoted somebody in this podcast that you and I both revere. You quoted the Golden Rule. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned briefly your belief about Jesus and his mm-hmm. teaching, and this is some common ground we have. I would love to ask you, who do you think Jesus was?
Well, to back up a little bit, we talk about the Golden Rule. That's not a specifically Christian or Judeo-Christian concept.
I know. It's echoed in all different religions. They all have their version of one.
Code of Hammurabi.
Yeah.
So we can talk about that. With Jesus, and it's. Again, whether he was a real person or a combination of people and so on, it's there is some discussion there. But assuming that he was a real person, I think that he was he was somebody who took exception to the rigidity and rules of the Christian of the Jewish religion. There's the Jewish religion has 613 mitzvot, rules for living, that controls a lot of, basically every morsel of food you put in your mouth, everything you do, it's very rigid. Christian Judaism is an orthoprax. And I talk about that in the book. It's an orthoprax religion. It's based on what you do, the rituals that you follow. Islam is the same way. But that rigidity, the fact that that Judaism had become politicized in the sense that, in the sense that you have, the Sanhedrin, basically making political decisions. He was very much against this kind of theocratic, politicized religion that always gets corrupted. It always gets taken over by the powerful, for those who want to make money, and he was breaking away from that. And so he was a truth sayer that looked at what is, let's get back to our roots as humans, our roots, in our religion itself, the Jewish religion, that, looks at, again, compassion, gets rid of all this extraneous junk and really focuses on, treating people justly, treating people humanely and with compassion. Without the heavy-handed, again, political, judgmental components. And I think that was what the true Jesus was. The Sermon on the Mount. There's very few words in the Bible that came directly from the mouth of Jesus. The Sermon on the Mount, I think, is the epitome, and it's, if you solely focused on those words, Christianity would be infallible. I think the challenge, again, the challenge is the politicization, the mythicization, and so on, where the differences of opinion or resistance comes in. And I don't think Jesus was not a warrior for God, some, muscular, combative, pugilistic person. Sure, he threw the money changers out of the temple, supposedly. But that was more, out of a sense of, again, that the Jewish religion had become ossified and overly politicized, and basically just an opportunity for people to gain power and make money.
I'm just curious, total rabbit trail here. Why do you say muscular like it's pejorative?
So it's not a pejorative. I mean, I'm a fairly well muscular guy myself, right?
You're like, Jesus wasn't this muscular guy.
It's borrowing a term. I believe, it was initially coined by Billy Graham, that Jesus was this muscular Jesus, strong, powerful, masculine. And there's nothing wrong with that. I just think it's a misreading of who he was. And, you look at now people talking, you see these memes. It's not memes coming from the left, of Jesus toting an M16 and,
oh gosh.
MAGA hat on, and he's, if Jesus was alive today,
sure,
he'd be a MAGA American,
right?
And that's where I'm trying. I'm using this in kind of a tongue-in-cheek way,
gotcha.
But that's the way people have called it. The muscular Jesus, the tough guy, the warrior, and he may have been a spiritual warrior, but that he would be the last person that would involve himself in politics.
If I were on the left, I would be trying to reclaim the word muscular, because you're right, it's become politicized, but it shouldn't be. I think men on both sides of the aisle should value strength, and I certainly wouldn't depict Jesus with an AR-15 riding on a bald eagle, although that would be pretty sweet. But I do believe any first century carpenter was probably very muscular.
And think of muscular in the real sense.
Exactly.
Like
that's the only sense I'm thinking of it.
I pump iron in the gym and everything else. I'm talking about it also in kind of a symbolic way. I mean, I look at some of the guys I know a number of billionaires in Silicon Valley personally, powerful men. Even when you talk about an alpha male, quiet, even-keeled, strong men.
Oh, that are 100% agree with you. That's real strength. Yeah, real strength doesn't need to, be loud and beat their chest. Real strength is confident and it's humble, and it's usually the quieter one in the room. I totally would agree with you on that. Martin, this has been awesome. I've enjoyed all the topics we've covered. It's been great to hear your perspective on Christianity, your perspective on us. We covered a lot. We touched on politics and a little bit of family structure and strength and masculinity. And I just want to thank you again for your time.
I'm so glad you reached out to me. It's been a pleasure for me as well. And, anytime you want this side's perspective, hey, feel free to reach out.
I love it. You'll be our go-to atheist.
Awesome.
All right. Thanks, Martin. To find out more about what we're doing and to join us on our mission, go to men'salliancetribe.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and give us a 5-star review.